5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. The only thing we have to fear is fear.
Mile 18.
This is Endurance Nation.
Hey there, welcome to the Endurance Nation podcast. My name is Patrick McCran and I'll be your host. Every week I break down a different topic on endurance sports, training, racing, strategy, using Endurance Nation's 4 key values of consistency, community, camaraderie, and competition. Being an endurance athlete is not easy. You're juggling many different things, including time, resources, money, travel, work, life. It gets stressful at times, but what we do inside Endurance Nation is break things down to their basic building blocks. Make sure that you can put them into practice, whether you're training or racing, to make you a fitter, faster, and smarter athlete. We've been doing this since 2007 and helped thousands of athletes just like you reach their own personal best and the finish line that they've been chasing for a very long time. We look forward to helping you here on this podcast, but you can also follow us online at endurancenation.us, or if you're looking for a specific topic, just Google Endurance Nation and the topic. I'm sure we've got something. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Endurance Nation.
Hey everyone, Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation, back with another podcast. We're joined today, special guest, one of the members of the team, Mr. Rob Peters. Rob, how you doing?
Hey, good, thanks, Coach P. How are you?
So good, so good. I'm excited to hear about your experience at Ironman Texas and grateful that you're sharing it out with us. As I mentioned ahead of time, you were really connected with the team, like asking lots of questions. Texas is unique with the sort of typically non-wetsuit swim and the bike course being on like a freeway and the wind. It's a simple on paper Ironman, but when you actually get closer to it, you're like, actually, this is pretty complicated. I'm looking forward to unpacking a lot of that with you and getting into it. But first things first, tell us the high level stats of your day. What'd you end up doing? What were your split and how did that, what was your goal and how did that work out?
Sure. It was my second Ironman. My first Ironman was in California in October. I went 10:34 at California, and that was an ultra fast course. And I had only 3 months of real triathlon training going into California. So I trained quite a bit through the winter and was hoping that I could PR, maybe significantly PR. I also gained a little bit of weight, so I wasn't quite sure. I figured that might slow down my run a little. But I also raced a bit conservatively in California. So I thought if I am able to dial up the intensity a little and not blow up, that should also help me PR. So it ended up being a wetsuit swim. I went 117, swam pretty steady. If you look at my heart rate curve, it went a little high at the beginning, I think, like it is for everybody, and then leveled off and stayed pretty steady. The big thing I was happy about is I felt like I had enough endurance and strength in my arms that I felt like I could still pull hard even at the end of the swim. Even though that's not a fast swim, I'm not a good swimmer. I guess a win was I felt like I kept pulling. I stayed left of the buoys, so I was really out of the crowd. So it's the course. You follow this like river, kind of a small reservoir, and the shore is on your right and the buoys are on your left. And I stayed to the left of the buoys, so they're on my right shoulder. So I was in less of the crowd. Another big goal was to get to the swim start earlier. I was running behind at Ironman California, and I got to the swim start on time. Nice. But I need to keep this high level. So 117 transition, I wanted to improve. I think I went about 6 minutes, which is 7 minutes, which is good, not amazing, but pretty good. Yeah. I put sunblock on, which looking at some people the next day, it looked like they hadn't. And the bike went really well. That was probably the biggest delta. I think I went 5:30 in California, which is a perfectly flat course, although there was like 17 to 20 mile an hour sustained winds. Texas was less windy than usual, and it was a little more of a crosswind, which is better than usual. So I broke 5 hours, so that was fun to break 5 hours on the bike. I didn't think, thank you. I didn't think my bike fitness was there, and it was, so that was a win. And my heart rate stayed low, and it wasn't my heart rate was super high, and I was pushing way too hard. My power numbers were reasonable, and my average heart rate was actually 1 beat per minute lower than it was in California. Try to keep it high level. And then the T2, about 6 minutes, 5, 6 minutes. Okay, not blazing, but decent. And then the run on the bright side. So I guess on the downside, I had GI distress. I took in too much scratch or too much sugar at multiple points. Got lower GI distress and had to go to the porta john like 8 times. So that was the downside. My run I was hoping to really have a great run and even improve on my California run. So I was about, I think, 13 minutes slower than my California run. But with my gut shutting down and going to the bathroom a bunch, it got really hard. The last probably 12 miles or whatever were really hard, harder mentally and even physically than in California, because when things start to go negative, you're running. It's a harder mental battle. 100%. So I kept running, kept pushing, and managed a 14-minute PR. So that I PR'd by 14 minutes, which is a significant PR on a slightly harder course. And my age group place was a couple places better than it was in California.
Nice. That's huge. It's awesome. I'm glad you're able to find some highlights in there and separate. I think sometimes people just lump it all together and say, my final time was this, which is it's usually good or bad. Nobody really says meh. And so I'm grateful that you sussed out for us what those different elements were. So second Ironman, right? I think one of the things that's really different about how you approach racing, you're super intellectual. So you did a lot of planning, not just what am I going to do training wise, but also for race day. And you really tied everything's based off of California, which I love, because most athletes just start by being like, I'm doing Texas. What am I going to do there? And they don't look at their own personal baseline. This is what I did in California. So maybe 10 minutes faster makes sense. No, they usually just come in and say, I want a 4 handle on them because 4 sounds awesome. No connection to reality, whatever. So I think it's really helpful that you're stacking these together and creating a story, like a timeline that you'll be able to work off of going forward. When you started training and started thinking about Texas and trying to obviously be better, but maybe thinking about the course, what was like 1 or 2 sort of key changes you made in your training? Did you do more volume? Did you focus more on swimming? Like, how did you go about trying to structure a faster race through your training?
That's a good question. I guess I just figured a big part of it would be the cumulative months of training. Because in 2022, I was not really in the mood for an Ironman. I was focused on ultra trail running, and I did February to August was all ultra trail running and just bike commuting. So going into California, I only really had 3 months, or I guess maybe 2.5, whatever, August, September, October. Yeah, 2.5 months of dedicated Ironman training. So I just figured that alone, an extra several months of specific triathlon training should create a delta, especially with the swim, which I hadn't, especially with the swim and bike, because obviously the ultra trail training should have had some translation to the run. So I wasn't necessarily expecting to be more fit on the run. I was hoping to be a little lighter, and that might create a delta, and that didn't end up materializing. But I just figured several more months of bike and swim training would make a difference. And I leaned in a little more. I tried to lean in to the bike and swim a little more because I felt like my run was in a good place.
Okay. I like that.
Thank you. And volume, of course, I think a lot of triathletes are like, oh, I'm going to bike 1 million hours a week and swim 30,000 yards a week. And of course, not whatever. And so, of course, I had these huge ambitious goals. If I averaged the 8 to 10 weeks leading up to race day, compared California to Texas, I did definitely swim a bit more, but honestly, bike and run hours were about the same, if not a little less, going into Texas. Okay. And that kind of shocked me a little. It was a busy time for work and I had some work trips and things. And I think that one of the great takeaways, reminders of that, you don't always have to do like huge excessive volume to see an improvement. If you're just consistently putting in a solid amount, month after month, year after year, it doesn't have to be some magic double your volume or whatever. You can get improvements that way. And I'm sure you've seen that many times with athletes.
I've seen both. I'm really glad you highlighted that and we came to that, because people will do that. The closer they get to the race, the greater the anxiety, and the response to that anxiety is, I just need to add more training, which sounds good because you're like, oh, I biked 2 hours last week. I'll bike 4 hours on Thursday this week. That sounds not bad. But to your point, you add that up across a week, and then you start looking at the rest of your commitments. Then you start taking that time from other places, right? People start losing sleep, or they start compromising work or family. And there's massive consequences to disrupting your life beyond just the normal disruption that is Ironman training. I don't think, to your point, I would vastly prefer that athletes try to find improvement in that race buildup from either quality or execution in terms of how they're going to run their whole day than I would about a compromise. We have a race rehearsal where we do 2 race rehearsals on the team, which are bigger days. But otherwise, by the time you really start that race prep, most of the mega time that you'll spend training has happened, whether it's been across more months like you did, or if you were on a shorter schedule and you did a lot of volume in a block. But most age group athletes just can't handle all that work heading into the race and still race. They can do all the work. They're the people walking on the run who said, hey, do you guys remember 3 months ago we did that like bike across America thing? That was so great. And now you get to talk about it for 26 miles walking next to each other, which is just awful. Just not a great place to be. Okay, that's super helpful. Did your race is just in October. So I'm assuming there was no real equipment changes or anything between the 2 races. Did you make any upgrades?
Yeah, I did make a couple upgrades on the bike. So that was something. Before I forget though, one other, I guess, pretty big difference was even though the average volume across the 8 weeks or 10 weeks of the race build was pretty similar, aside from a little more swimming, I had 2 really big weeks during the Texas build, like big camp weeks.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had any particularly big weeks in the California build. And as a solid camp week can really deliver a lot of dividends.
100%. And the way that you did it was actually perfect. Again, like we can separate the race process from that volume process and say, hey, I'm going to go do a bunch of swim, bike, run. That's great. Because the closer we bring that volume to the race, the higher the likelihood that people will want to do that volume at their race. Oh, I want to run 7:45s. I'll just run all this running this week at 7:45s while I'm also biking at my desired race pace. And again, those systems just break down and don't return what you need. Plus, camp weeks are fun, but they're also really tiring. Like, I don't know how you felt, but in the past I've done them and it's great for 3 days. And like by day 4, it starts to feel like a job and it's hard. You got to start tricking yourself. Like, how am I going to get out the door? I'm going to go get a cupcake or something. You got to figure out some way to trick yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, mine went really well. Did definitely have those times where it's, oh my gosh, I got to bike for another 3 hours to hit my weekly target. But I will say both of them were like I was escaping the cold north and traveling to somewhere warm and tropical. So that's a huge incentive. And 100%. I was with family. I don't live with family in Michigan. So, being able to be with family during dinners and lunches and breakfasts or whatever, that's a huge performance enhancer. So that made both those camp weeks special in other ways.
Love that. And that's definitely something we recommend. If you can tie your training volume to away time, great. So it is actually like a mental break for you, because as you noted, training in the cold, it's possible, but it's not fun. And then bonus friends and family, like another huge win. Like it just ends up being positivity all around. Yeah. That's fantastic. I love that. Super smart.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's dive a little bit into the race.
Okay, equipment upgrades real quick. I got a little.
Oh yeah, that's right. Equipment upgrades.
I got a little deeper front wheel.
Okay.
So I think 50 millimeters to 64 millimeters. I had a generic Chinese carbon rim with a DT Swiss 360 hub. And I thought front and rear for California. And those wheels had treated me really well and turned in some really fast times in other races and rides. But I just I was go all in for Texas. Like I had the bug and I was like, I can afford it. I'm going to get a deeper one, just see what happens. And you may have seen my post, but I spent a day doing side-by-side wheel comparison between the 50 millimeter and 64 millimeter. And I actually didn't think across one day with 3 or 4 replicates that I could detect a difference, but I actually detected a consistent difference with the slightly deeper flow wheel. So that wheel was awesome and super dialed. And then I finally got a disc cover after everybody on the team telling me to get a disc cover for my rear wheel for years and years and me never doing it. I finally got a disc cover for my rear wheel, which isn't a huge thing, but is a little bit of time on the bike potentially.
Yeah, 100%. And what's nice about that is some of those upgrades, they continue to pay dividends, right? You're like, now it's going to be hard to race a course without a disc cover because you're like, it's badass. And I went sub 5. That's a nice version of that. And like you said, your fitness wasn't that different and your heart rate was actually lower.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard not to say it was the wheels or the setup, all that stuff. Okay, let's get a little bit into the day. So I know we talked a little earlier about managing the race, like the race day is really on some level a timed event where you are solving lots of little problems and there's free food and places to stop along the way if you need to. And also known as triathlon. Tell me a little bit about, so you knew it was wetsuit legal, right? They ended up making it wetsuit legal. Okay. So
it was kind of a it was a last minute decision, but I would say as of race week, all the suggestions were it's very likely to be wetsuit legal, but it was still a game time decision. Although I think it was still wetsuit illegal for the pros, so that's how close it was.
Yeah. Who cares about those folks though? Come on, they're like totally abnormal. We should make it harder. We should give them like concrete boots to run in too.
Yeah,
if they survive.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Let's dive into your swim. So I'll set the context for the map. Like Rob mentioned, it's, if those of you who are watching on the video, it's basically like a 3-leg swim. You're basically swimming down to the bottom. It's kind of a little crooked just to get to where you want to do. Turn around, come back up, almost back to where you started. And then you take a right-hand turn and go into a canal. A couple of things there. On the way back up, there's like a fake right-hand turn, which is not the right-hand turn. And most people swim for it because they're like, oh, thank God, it's a turn. It's a wrong right-hand turn. And the second part is the canal is not a canal like you'd imagine perhaps in like Venice or some other place. It's literally like basically they took like a concrete box and took the top off of it and put it in there as the canal. And so the sides are vertical. So it's kind of like a bathtub. When you splash a little bit, it comes right back at you. So the canal is actually not a very fun place to swim, especially if there's a good amount of people in there. The fans get super close because they're like right there. But for swimmers, it's kind of, there's waves everywhere, like much more so than a true ocean or open water swim. Walk us through like how you broke that down or how the swim went for you.
Sure. Yeah. I went out a little hot. I could tell just by my RPE and breathing, but I think you're fresh, you're excited. It didn't feel too, I just knew I was probably swimming a little harder, but I got things under control. People said not to do this, but I just like doing it when I have my watch set up to buzz every 500 yards. And so the water there is really murky and everyone said, oh, you're not going to be able to see your watch or whatever. But I usually, when it buzzes, I usually do a half stroke with my left arm and sight and glance at my watch just to see what was my 500 split like. And yeah, maybe I lose like a half second because that's a bad swim stroke. But across an hour, it's not that different than looking up and sighting, I don't think. So I don't think it really negatively impacts your swim that much. And for me, I just like knowing, what was that 500? Am I slowing down? Am I speeding up? So my first split was pretty decent. And I was like, oh, that's fast. I started slowing down a little, which I figured would be slipping into a more realistic pace. I was hoping to swim closer to like 110. So obviously 117 is quite a bit slower, but I don't have a good history of swimming fast in open water. I started in a good group. I would say I was swimming similar pace to most of the people around me. So that was another win. But yeah, I got down to the halfway point. Splits had slowed down a little, but I just tried to stay focused on just swimming steady, good streamline, keep your toes pointed, keep your feet and hips up. I was really doing everything I could not to just kind of let your legs float, save your legs and core for the bike and run. At one point, so I got to the halfway or that first third, made the turn, coming back. And at one point I looked over and somebody was like slowly cruising by me. I realized I had let up a little, just gotten a little complacent. And so I'm like, hey, maybe I can jump on their waist or their feet. Yeah. So I kicked up the effort a little and swam over next to that person's waist. And I probably drafted off them for not very long, 30 seconds, a couple minutes, but they were going too fast and it wasn't sustainable. So I just dropped off and did my own thing, but it did get me to, hey, you should keep pushing. Like you don't have to use your arms on the bike or swim. So you want your arms to be done when you get out of the water. Yeah. So don't get complacent. Keep pushing, keep pulling the water hard. And I think even around that point, my heart rate did creep up a little, like looking back at the data. Anyway, and then the only big thing was at the canal, there were 2 buoys that I assume you were supposed to swim between, but I saw them coming and all these swimmers were they were following the shoreline, which is basically like a little bit of a shortcut. To get between the 2 buoys, you would have had to swim a little further and then turn right. And I just kept watching and nobody was swimming for the buoy. Everybody was just taking the right turn, basically the tangent into this canal. And I'm like, man, if 50 other swimmers are doing this, I'm just going to do it. And if I get a penalty, I get a penalty. And I never heard anyone mention it. I wanted to ask, like, was that legal? Nobody ever brought it up, but that was the only kind of thing that really stood out. I wonder what we were supposed to do there, but got in the canal. I was really worried about the canal. Like you said, it's condensed, kind of grosser water, maybe a little bit. It didn't end up being too bad. I felt like I had space. I was watching my watch. Anyway, I got out and it was 1:17. And so I got out of the water a little slower than I'd hoped, but not too bad. Oh, one other big thing. I'd eaten quite a bit, or maybe I was like drinking Gatorade, or not way too much, but maybe I'd eaten a little bit more going to the swim. And I remember like burping up food a couple times, not like in an uncomfortable way when you've taken in enough calories and you burp up a little and you're like, okay, I've eaten enough. I better start drinking water for a while. And I had that happen a couple times, probably in the first 30 to 40 minutes of the swim. And I thought, oh boy, I guess I had plenty of calories this morning. Got to make sure to get the fluids going when I get out of the water.
Okay. First of all, on the path, there's certainly like a numbers thing where when enough people do it, the race directors can't undo it. That makes sense. I remember one year at Ironman Florida, for those of you who don't know, it's basically three sides of the square in the ocean. And when you go up, you go over and you come back in. And then from the beach, you don't run across the beach and start again. You basically, there's a buoy that's halfway between the two sides of the square that you're supposed to swim to the right of that and then go to the next buoy. So it ends up being like a parallelogram-ish, half a parallelogram. And one year we were there spectating, one of the pros came out of the water and started swimming and just started swimming for the corner buoy. Not the first buoy, but like the corner, like aggressive, like taking the square and cutting it in half, like literally formula for a triangle, right? Half length time width. That person took off and they were focused. Everyone's cheering the pros. And all of a sudden they realized it because the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth pros started all following the first pro. They don't look at the buoys. The pros are just looking at the people because they're like, if I do what everyone else is doing, then I'm okay. That sort of mentality, mob mentality. And they didn't know what to do but they couldn't get a jet ski out there because the jet skis were with all of the age groupers. And so they eventually had to wait for it to get a radio to get a jet ski in to then get them to stop. Because at that point in time, hundreds of people had started going that way. And they figured it out halfway through, but it was a bummer because I'm sure most people probably didn't know, but there's a healthy portion of swimmers who swam the first half of that swim that got a real big advantage. But in the canal, I think you're fine. But that plays out. It's true on the run as well, I would say, is that you'll see the pros and other people also running the tangents or whatever's possible. Obviously, not always a good idea on the bike at such high speeds, but that's fine. On the swim part, I really also want to highlight you want your arms to be tired by the time you get out. I think that's really important. I like how you separated like total fatigue, which a lot of people experience. I think when people are tired swimming, they're just like all of me, like my feet, my calves, my quads, but really not. Like when you're swimming, there's only a distinct part of you that's working. I think it's harder because of the hypoxic nature of swimming. But to your point, like if your arms are tired, who cares? Like your tiny little T-Rex arms don't have to do anything but hold little levers or push little buttons. Like you'll be fine. So I like the idea of continuing to keep that work rate up even at the end, which is very cool. Okay, all right. Let's get out on this bike course because this bike course is crazy. Again, setting the stage, there's a bunch of turns. Like you got to do your admin to get out, to get to the highway. And then you get to ride on the highway and then you got to do admin when you come back. But to me, I think that's an advantage because hopefully it keeps you in control. It's hard to speed up, slow down,
right,
and then ride. How did you play that? And then tell us when you realized, I'd love to know when you realized that you're like, oh, this will be a good bike. And did you start, let me put a little gas on the pedals here as I head into T2 because I got a number to look at.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I did want execution. My race plan and our execution guidelines definitely say to keep it a little easier the first 30 minutes. And I did do that. Or at least I kept my heart rate in a little lower than the target. And I was watching my speed even into the wind and then with the wind at the tail. And I knew like even early on, I was like, okay, my heart rate's in my 120s, my conservative end before I dial it up. And I'm already like cruising. So I was like, that right away, I was like, okay, this is good. And my test ride, like a couple days before the race with everything dialed in and fresh legs, that went really well too. So I knew I had the potential to have a good bike. And you're right, with all those extra turns, if you do it smart, that is a good place to take it easy, so to speak, because you can't hammer you shouldn't probably be hammering around every corner, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you come to a corner, you soft pedal a little, and those are times to let your body slowly adjust from the swim to the run or swim to the bike. And ditto for the end of the bike course. Usually at the end of the bike course, you have a little more turns and admin. And I feel like that can be a good time to, if you needed to back off a little, that's probably a better time to back off than those long straightaways where you can really make up ground.
Yes.
But yeah, I got to that was the huge thing I didn't mention. The morning of, I got to transition and my front tire had blown off. I have tubeless tires.
Oh, Jesus.
And I had never seen that before. I'd never seen a tire just blow off. And I'm assuming I hadn't put a ton of pressure in, but I'm assuming it baked in the Texas sun and over pressured. And so this is race morning. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. I went and stood in line for the mechanic. He seated it. I said, can you put some more sealant in? Because I bet I lost a bunch of sealant. He's like, oh, you've got plenty of sealant. And I was a little nervous about that, but whatever. And so I didn't really know when I got out of the water. I didn't know, am I going to have a flat tire or not? And luckily I got out of the water and it wasn't. So that right away is, okay, great.
Yep.
And then, but I also, for the first maybe 10, 20 minutes of the bike, I was also like, what's this front tire going to do? But it held.
Yeah.
So that was a big win. Oof. Got out on the highway. It was a little bit crosswind, but still a little bit more headwind out, tailwind back, which is the common situation in Texas. And yeah, pace was looking good. Pace was looking good into the headwind. But when you're out there, you don't really know for sure, like how much of a headwind and how much of a crosswind is this, right? Until you make the turn. So my speed was good. And I think it must be mile 40 or something before you make that first turn. So that was really a big point of illumination, was when you make that first turn, like how much of a crosswind was this and how much of a tailwind was this? And there was plenty of tailwind. Let's put it that way. I made the turn and it was like, okay, game on. So still, I didn't want to bury myself, obviously, because you got the run and I knew I had to come back into the headwind, and the winds obviously get stronger throughout the day. Right. Trying not to push too hard with that tailwind. I also dial it up maybe a little sooner, because I remember a conversation with you. You said if you can get to that first turn a little earlier and get ahead, basically get through the headwind earlier, the wind's going to build throughout the day and it's to your advantage to get through that headwind a little earlier, a little less wind, so to speak. Anyway, I made the turn and loved it. It was flying, but still tried to keep things dialed back. So leading into the GI distress conversation, there was a point on the bike where I'd taken in too much and I had pretty concentrated calories in my bottles, which not more concentrated than I've ever used before. It wasn't like I tried something new, but I think I just drank them a little faster than I had in practice. Anyway, I got to a point where I was like, okay, stomach is unhappy. Don't eat or don't drink for a while. Just drink water. So there was quite a while on that way back where I wouldn't say damage control, but like touch and go with the stomach. And then when I made the turn back into the wind again, it had calmed down enough. I was able to start taking calories in again. And I was like, okay, great. I dodged that bullet. I didn't bonk, didn't have any vomiting or diarrhea. And I can start taking in calories again. So then I'm back into the headwind and still making pretty good time, even though the wind is stronger. And I think that's when I was like looking at the numbers. Okay, yeah, you're having a really good bike. And I might have pushed a little bit thinking, I could break 5 hours. But I definitely didn't go above my plan or anything. It was more just like a mental thing to keep pushing, keep arrow. I will say that getting to that last turn, I thought I was going to be at mile 80. And I think it was at like mile 80. And I was pushing a little just because I knew once I made that turn, I could ease up. In those last 3 to 4 miles of that bike, I wasn't like dying, but I do remember thinking, oh gosh, I thought this was at mile 80. I got to keep pushing. I kept just thinking, is this turnaround? When is this turnaround? Yeah. So those last few miles into the wind was like, there was a little bit of fatigue there, but then you get to the tailwind and just crushing. Anyway, I know we're short on time, but yeah, those are some highlights from the bike course.
Okay, no worries. How did you, when you started to notice that gut distress, did you then like dial back and meter down your consumption for the rest of the bike? Or was it just a blip? What was your strategy there?
Oh, yeah. There was like a solid 15, 20 miles. So maybe almost an hour where I don't think I ate. I think I just drank water and maybe took an electrolyte tablet. But I usually grab Gatorade at the aid stations. But since my stomach was acting up, Vincent had told me definitely douse water on yourself on the bike. And you had probably said that too. So I was already like, whenever I could, I'd grab a bottle from an aid station, douse myself, and then drink a little. And when during that hour when my stomach was off, I just would drink more water. So I'd douse myself, drink more water, and keep going. And I figured I did the numbers. I'm like, whatever it was, I was like, oh, you've eaten like 800 calories in the first 75 minutes. So you're good on calories. It's okay if you don't eat again for a while.
Don't need any more.
So just let things settle. So it was probably almost an hour maybe where I was pretty much just water at every aid station.
Oh, now were you, okay, good. That's good to know. And that's a generally recommended protocol, which is just back off, give your stomach time, give it some fluids, help dilute the concentration in your gut. Were you drinking the concentrated stuff from your bottles? Like what was the flow?
When I say concentrated, I just mean it's Scratch Super Fuel, which is a pretty dense drink. It's 400. If you make it as it's described on the serving, it's 400 calories per 18 to 20 ounces or whatever, which is a lot. It's supposed to be the starch, so it's supposed to be more digestible, whatever. And I've used that in other races and in plenty of training rides and stuff. But sometimes, so I have these bigger bottles. How big are they? I don't think I have one sitting around, but they're these extra large bottles. And so they're a little, maybe like 25% bigger than a typical bike bottle. And sometimes you put 7 scoops for a serving. And sometimes I'd put 10 and a half, which is like 1.5 servings in a bottle. And sometimes I'd go a full 2 servings in a bottle. In the morning of the race, it's going to be pretty cool when you get on the bike. It's probably okay. You're probably not going to be having to pound fluids. So it's probably okay if your bottles are at the full strength rather than a serving and a half. And that was a race morning decision that I have practiced before, but it just meant that my bottles were like the highest end of 400 calories per 20 ounces. That's at the high end of what you'd probably want. Does that answer your question? It
does for sure. Yeah, that's okay. I wasn't sure what that actually meant. I've done races before where they didn't have Gatorade, so I had a concentrated Gatorade bottle, like all of my Gatorade, and then basically syrup. And I was like, put it in here and then add water, which is logistically challenging. Yeah, that's hard. I would say that liquid calories and that's one you have to practice a lot, which it sounds like you had done. But for folks out there listening for the first time, if you start toggling the fluid calories, the important part to remember is you need fluid regardless. And you need fluid with electrolytes. And yes, you want some calories in there. But as you start to up the concentration piece, then there's a time liability that starts to enter the equation, right? When you're just moving it a little bit, there's no ramifications. But as you start to increment up, that's where all of a sudden your ability to sustain that nutrition over time starts to drop. And the chart no longer stays at 6 hours. You get 3. And it's just because of the concentration, striking that balance. You had the wherewithal to adjust and everything, which is fantastic. But that's something I think a lot of people run into where they're like, I could solve it with this one magical powder that I just fill up on. And stomach doesn't like one source of fuel. That's for sure.
Yeah, I did. Looking back at my sort of race reflections, I did eat more Cliff Bars and more like blocks at California. I think it was a similar number of total calories, close to similar, but I think I was trying to do more liquid calories in Texas, I guess, for convenience. Not necessarily intentionally. I had the Cliff Bars in my pockets, but since I overloaded in that first hour, I think just that's the way it played out. I didn't end up eating as much solid food. One other, if anybody listening is working towards Texas for next year, one big warning I'll give is on the highway between the lanes. In some places, there's a little gap. And luckily, I didn't have any issues, but I saw someone crash and I read about other people crashing. And there was a couple times where I was riding and you're in the zone or whatever. And I wasn't like watching the road that closely because it's a very smooth pavement. But you get close to that little gap between the lanes and that could swallow your wheel up and end your day. So if you're thinking about Texas, just be aware of that for the bike course.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true because it runs parallel to your wheels, right? Exactly right. Like you slot into one of those pieces. It's like people are worried about crossing train tracks. It's like riding next to train tracks. And if you get in there, you can't get the wheel out at the speed you're working. And the stopping power of the concrete is quite high, unfortunately. And it also does not do a good job of catching you. That's an excellent point and just a consequence of racing on the highway and something to be aware of. I remember the old Texas course had us just to go way out. And it was like true chip seal, which you're probably familiar with living in the Midwest, but like true chip seal for East West coasters is like literally the road department, the DPW comes out and just dumps pavement down, moves it around a little bit, and then on a steamroller or whatever. And as a result, where the wheels go on the cars is actually the smoothest part, which is not on the side of the road at all. You're kind of almost blocking a little bit to be there. So that was the recommendation. In this case, you'd want to avoid that particular place on the highway. Okay. Well, let's move ahead. We got about 5 more minutes or so. I would love to unpack the run. Texas is traditionally hot, although you've already touched on it. It wasn't super hot, but still it's important. The delta between perceived temperature bike and perceived temperature run is pretty dramatic. So yeah, what was your strategy? I remember you were doing some last minute shopping and you had some super interesting. Do you have that thing nearby? I'd love to see is it like stuck in a bike box?
Grab it. It was on Etsy. It's basically like a regular bandana with a washcloth sewn onto it. And the washcloth is not sewn across the whole thing.
You don't have a drawer for those things. You can't put it in your sock drawer. It's just, you don't have a normal, it's like not a thing you normally have where you'd have a place for it.
Exactly. Recently I had the thought I need a drawer for hot weather things. And I think I even put a little spot in my drawer for my arm coolers and my bandana thing. But anyway, I recently did some reorganizing, so I guess it's not.
Don't worry about it.
Not jumping out at me, but you can, if you Google it on Etsy, bandana for ice or whatever. It's the family that makes them has a child with some sort of metabolic disorder, and they say that a portion of every sale they make a donation to a charity that helps people with this disorder.
Okay.
It worked surprisingly well. This is one of the places where I did the thing you're not supposed to do and tried something on race day I'd never practiced, but it actually worked really well. Yeah, so I tied it around my neck. The first time I got to the aid station, I untied it and held it out and filled it with ice that way. But at future aid stations, I realized you could just reach back with one hand, pull the washcloth back, and then just dump a cup of ice with the other hand, and it would fall into the pocket. So that thing was awesome. Of all the ice in the hat, the ice in the arm sleeves, that was my favorite. That was the most refreshing place to have the ice. So if anybody's doing a hot race, I think Gabe Peterson and someone else probably recommended the bandana thing to me, and I was skeptical, but I loved it. So anybody doing a hot race, I'm a 6'2", 200 pounds. My dimension, my head and things tend to fit a little tight. And I wasn't sure if the bandana would be constrictive around my neck, but I was able to tie it and still not feel like it was constricting my breathing. But anyway, that was a great thing. I had arm coolers from when I did rim to rim with some of the guys from the team, the orange mud arm coolers, and they're just white wicking material. 2 nice things. One, they have a little pocket up by the bicep that you could put trash in. And the other thing is they have these bigger pockets in the forearms, and I assume that's for putting ice in. So when I'd get to an aid station, I just held my arm out, opened the pocket with one hand, and said to the volunteer, or as I approached, I said, ice. And then I'd hold it open and I'd say, dump ice in here. And that way I could get both the arm sleeves filled pretty fast. It still took some time. You have to stop running and stand there while the volunteer does that. But the thing I liked was if I ever do a really hot race, I feel like I've got that protocol down pretty good now. But yeah, the first aid station, I wanted to be running easy anyway, so I figured I didn't care if I spent a few extra seconds messing with ice, but I put it in both arm sleeves and then put in the bandana thing. Don't think I put it in my hat in the very first one, but basically that was my go-to thing for a while. And like I said, initially I was like, boy, I feel cold. And in my head at that time, I was still like, oh, this is my secret edge over all my competitors. Everybody else is dying of heat and I feel cool and refreshed. And maybe that was true to some extent, but I think I was probably a little overkill on that. The one other nice thing about that was running the tangents on the course in a few places meant that I was in exposed sun as opposed to being in the shade. And I wasn't afraid of running in the exposed sun because 1, my arms were covered in sleeves, and 2, I was cool from ice. So I was like, I'm going to run this tangent even though these other people are running in the shade because I feel plenty cool. I feel cold almost. So let's go. I lost you again on the audio there, Coach P. I don't know if that...
Oh, sorry. Totally. Okay. I'm muted. Yeah, sorry. No, I'm good. Totally. I think there's a couple things there that jump out at me. Like, you're right about the heat protocol. Like, once you've solved the race for heat, I think it just makes you a better racer across the board, like all temperatures. Because I think once you have to go to an extreme and start thinking about edge case management, when you come back to the normal, even anything that sort of seems a little bit outside of the box, you have a wide range of solutions. Whereas normally you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm not drinking enough. And you're like, your only solution is I should probably drink more. But as someone who's dealt with a hot race, you already know like how much more you can drink and what it means to drink more and how to manage it. And I think honestly, having an environmentally challenging race is actually really important early in your career. So to your point, no matter what the event is, like whether it's again going back to ultra, if you decide to do more ultra stuff, or getting to the tri side, like now you have that heat box checked. And even if you don't have all the answers, you're like, I know how I do in the heat, which is even more important, right? Because there's probably some other sort of crazy protocol or thing you wouldn't think of doing, but like you're like, I know for me what my danger signs are, how I manage them, how I get myself back to sort of homeostasis. So that's massive. Plus, like you said, all the gear. Like I still have arm coolers. Like I've got like 3 pairs of arm coolers because I wouldn't bring them to a race, and then I get there and I'm like, I gotta buy another pair of arm coolers. Hey, that's perfect, just what I needed. But it makes a big difference. And honestly, getting better at managing heat, like you're not going to get infinitely smaller. Like at 6'2", you're just a big person, and as big people, I'm also just under 6'2". Maybe 6'2" with this hat on the top there. We accumulate heat like nobody's business. We're like solar panels with no place to put the energy. And so we have to be super careful. And when you start bringing performance into the equation, not just saying survival, it does really matter. So I'm super pleased that you made the decision you did on the run and got yourself super cool. Because the opposite side of that, like saying, it's not hot as it was hot. Once you do get to the point that you're hot, you can't shed that heat without walking for substantial amounts of time. And that really starts to disrupt your entire system, nutrition, your hydration program, and all of that, which is so tough. Awesome. So talk to me that you mentioned some early GI distress on the bike, and then on the run, obviously you face challenges as well. What would you do, like knowing what happened to you now, what would you do differently going back? Like what's your switch that you'd be like, I think next time I'll try this instead of that? So anything that's out there for you now?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I was really serious about my fiber fast the 2 days before the race to try to prevent the need to have to sit down during the race.
Okay.
I had used the Porta-John twice in California, which I was okay. You know, I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, and a couple bathroom stops wasn't a huge deal. I was hoping to maybe only have one during Texas. But anyway, I think the weekend leading into the race, I had a buddy's birthday party. It was like this all-day party bus thing. We stayed the night at his house. So I wasn't necessarily eating my normal foods. And then I had the plane trip and things were a little hectic. So the several days, even leading into race week, I think my diet was a little bit off. And then I remember even the day before I started my fiber fast, I remember being like, boy, you know, when I don't get enough fruits and vegetables, I feel off. My gut feels off. And this might sound a little hokey pokey to some people, but whatever, this is how I feel. And I probably should have 2 mornings before the race. I probably should have had a good, healthy meal with fruits and vegetables. But instead, I was like, I got to start the fiber fast now. I don't want to have any fiber in my gut on race day. But I think my gut was a little off just from that weekend and not eating well. And then I had a really strict fiber fast, which also can make me feel a little funny sometimes. So I think maybe my gut was already a little sensitized. And looking back, I'd obviously had a pretty good amount of calories prior to the swim because I don't usually like burp up food during the swim. I wish I had been a little more careful on the bike, either slowing down that fluid consumption or maybe early on doing a little more like water, Gatorade. And then getting to the run, you go to the bathroom once and you're like, okay, go to the bathroom once, not that big a deal. It's hard to say like when would have been the point to be like, this is it. But I guess, and maybe I need to talk to you about this a bit more, but once you notice you're starting to have kind of diarrhea, like one part of me wonders, should I have stopped taking calories altogether because I wasn't going to be absorbing them anyway, and that might have stopped some bathroom stops. But I did keep occasionally like drinking some Gatorade and maybe doing a half gel just because I was also afraid of getting like low blood sugar and bonking that way. So that's a little bit of an unknown for me. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. And it's super hard because once you get to the place where like your digestive tract things are tough, it's hard to turn the corner. And so I don't think there's anything necessarily you could have done on the day that's like a magical piece. And again, if you talk to 800 triathletes, 750 of them will tell you to take like Imodium. They probably haven't taken it. I have taken it. And let me tell you, the security of knowing where you are on race day is not worth the insecurity you will personally feel digestively for the next 2 days after the race when you want to eat because you're starving, but you can't eat because there's a traffic jam inside your body. So not worth it. So I would say I would definitely take a look at I think really honestly, I think it's a like a slurry situation for you. My guess is with either slightly heavy on the calories for the bike food, set the stage, and then your regular what you would eat on the long run side just led you to a situation where you were just a little in a tough spot. And what I found, and just a point of like something you can try is that when I do get into sort of warmer races, I tend to, if these two windows that include both of us, but I can't move, that's your screen. But if like I try to put all the calories that I need to think about, I say to myself, oh, in a normal day, my calorie distribution, bike to run, maybe 60-40 in a normal day. Or if you said bike Saturday, run Sunday, it's 60-40. But when I'm putting them together and it's a warmer day, it ends up sort of more like 80-20, not because I'm moving more calories to the bike, but that just when it gets hotter, I just end up drinking more and consuming less. And so I just can't, I'll drink Coke and I'll have maybe Gatorade at an aid station, for example. Well, I would normally say have a gel every 3 to 4 miles or have a cliff block every mile. Those start to get spaced out because the amount of fluid in my gut is so much higher than what it could sustain. So I may just reimagine your distribution there a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I also did force down this thing called a wolf pack that's made by Spring Gel. I wouldn't say
Wait, you tell me this now? You tell me this now?
No, I forgot.
I also ate a grenade.
No, it's not a grenade. It's at the end of the bike. I've eaten these a lot in training. It's a little higher in fat composition. So a lot of people would be able to be like, oh, you took in some fats, duh. But I've used them before. And sometimes when I'm just eating sugars, my gut can get distressed. So it was towards the end of the bike, I had this wolf pack in my pocket, and it was partly the realization, like I've pretty much had all liquid calories. I haven't had anything solid. And this wolf pack has some oatmeal and some stuff. So I'm like, the bike's winding down, and I'm like, you should probably have some solid calories. So I reached for the wolf pack thing. It's like 400 calories, and I took half of it, and it was fine. But I think I also was like, okay, you're about to start the run. It's going to be harder to eat on the run. Just take this whole thing now. And that might have also been what pushed me over the edge.
Yeah. I would definitely go with that. Like the other piece too could be like excessive caffeine abuse that could lead to some dietary gut restriction. But I would say that's one of the differentiating factors between like a race simulation or a long ride and a race performance. Because normally you do that long ride, you could eat the wolf pack. Maybe you do a brick run, half an hour off of it. You're like, man, that's fun. But it's that extended portion. It's that last bit where things just really get exposed to that piece. So in the future, I would say instead of the wolf pack, I would go for, I'm going to eat a banana. Either slow down at a station or get a banana or make a commitment to, I usually have a banana in T2. So my solid food is in T2 if I can't get one on the course or there's not an early aid station. That could be like your solid food reward version for that. Again, just for the sensitivity side of your stomach, it's possible that there's some combination. But overall, like a fantastic race. This is what we do inside the team. We start to get a little nitpicky. And the guy PR, like, give him a break, for the love of God. Sub 5 on the bike and everything. Okay, real fast. I've only got like 1 minute, so I got to go pick up my kid. But what's next for you this year? What's on the plate?
Thanks. I'm doing this 3-day ultra running thing called Scummy Summer Slammer in Montana on July 9th. You don't run through the night. You camp each night. But it's super cool. It's grassroots. It's volunteer led. So they don't even have a registration fee. They just ask you to make a donation, whatever you feel is comfortable, or provide volunteers. And I helped out at it last year. It's put on by the Bozeman Run Club and co-sponsored by John G, which is a running brand.
Okay.
Hopefully enough snow melts because they've had a huge snow year. It's high in the mountains. It's far north. So the big thing will be whether or not enough snow melts, but I have to get a ton of vert for that. It's 30 miles, 10,000 feet the first day, 30 miles, 10,000 feet the second day, 18 miles the third day. So it's a pretty big undertaking.
Yeah.
And then I'm hoping to do an 84-mile FKT in Michigan with Clark, who's not on the team currently, I think, but Clark, what's his last name? Clark, right? Mitchell, yeah, Clark Mitchell, in late August, Labor Day. And I probably shouldn't have said that publicly because it's a soft FKT right now. And I'm really hoping nobody fast goes and crushes it because then I don't think we could take it. But anyway, so those are the kind of the two scheduled things.
Okay. I love it. I also like the balance of your year in terms of doing something like serious and the time focused and multidisciplinary. And then also saying, hey, I'm super fit now. I'm going to go do some fun stuff. And that kind of loops back to what you started in the beginning, which was, hey, I brought a lot of ultra run fitness to my triathlon game. And we see more of that inside the team, athletes exploring different sports and having fun and solving new problems. And in some cases, like this scummy summer slammer, which sounds an awful lot like whatever you ate at the end of your bike, by the way. Possibly, if it sounds like an ultra race, you probably shouldn't eat it, just as like a baseline level rule. But I think it's just so important to have that diversity of interest, because in the past, in old school days, people would just be like, I'm a triathlete and I can only do triathlon, and anything else is like below me or whatever. And I think there's a path to burnout in there, but also it's less fun. But also, I don't think excellence is about doing the same thing over and over again. I think we learn more about ourselves when we get outside of our comfort zone, and you seem to be on path to do just that. So awesome. Rob, hey, thank you so much for joining me. This has been awesome. It's our first race podcast in a long time. I'm so grateful, not only for your participation in the community, but for raising your hand and being like, I'll totally talk about Ironman Texas and everything associated with it. So yeah, super kudos to you. Thank you.
Huge thanks to you, Coach P, and huge thanks to everybody on the team for all the advice and guidance and inspiration they gave me going into the race. And if anybody has more questions, feel free to hit me up.
Awesome. Let's do it. Okay, brother. Best of luck. I'm sure I'll talk to you this summer as well. But until we do connect, be well. All right. See you.
For sure. Thanks a ton, Coach.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.
For more information about Endurance Nation, visit us online at endurancenation.us. The provided music is from the Podshow Podsafe Music Network. Check it out at music.podshow.com.